us judge the dogs. And smell them.
Hello friends, and welcome to the best 3 months of the year. If you're watching this, we've officially made it to October 2023. It's arguably the most exciting time of the year, but before we get into all of that, we have to wrap up September, and that's exactly what this video is for. We are going to be doing my September wrap-up. I read 8 books this month, which, all things considered, I think is pretty successful. As with any type of wrap-up, don't compare yourself to what I read. Maybe you only read half a book this month, maybe you read 20 books this month. We're all still equal, we're all just enjoying things. I never want to come on here and make people feel bad or make it seem like you should be reading a certain way. And also just in general, make sure you're checking the content warnings, especially for this time of year. People are recommending some scarier books that a lot of times can focus on unsettling topics. With that out of the way, let's just get into it. The first book that I finished this month was The Wishing Game by Meg Schaefer. And I think out of all the books that I read this month, this is the one that I remember the least, which I guess makes sense because it's the first one I read, but also because it just didn't feel that memorable to me. This story is kind of very much shaped around Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but books instead of candy. So in this, you have an author who decided one day to stop writing. Nobody knows why, nobody really knows what happened to him, he just disappeared. He wrote children's books, so a lot of people grew up on him and they wondered what could have happened to this guy. And then one day he announces that there's going to be a game, there's going to be kind of a contest that he's hosting at his island. You can only get in if you know some secret, and the protagonist obviously has the answer. Which from that alone, it made me less excited to read it, just because at least with Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, it's kind of up to chance. It's kind of just you find the golden ticket, then you can get in no matter who you are. With this, it was you have to have some previous relationship in order to know the secret that gets you to the island so that you can do this thing. So from the beginning, barely anybody has a chance, so it's a lot less exciting. There's also no point where you get any real character development for the other contestants, so there's no point where you even would consider rooting for them. In Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, you know they're not the greatest kids, but they're also kids with personalities. You get introduced to their families, you kind of see why they are the way that they are. So even though you don't want them to win, you don't wish bad things on them. But the characters in this are essentially strangers. You don't get any backstory really at all. And then the other thing that I just completely forgot to mention about this book is all the contestants are people that have looked up to this author and the illustrator for most of their lives. They read this when they were kids and now they're all fully living as adults and just going to this contest to live out their childhood dreams. So tell me how it's appropriate that the illustrator is getting romantic with the contestants? I know it's just a book, and it really does not matter at all, but I couldn't root for that relationship whatsoever because it's just weird that it's happening. If you meet someone when they're 13 and you're 20-something, no matter how old you are when you begin the romantic relationship, it's a weird dynamic to have. Especially when you're a celebrity to them, it's just... I can't get over that. But anyway, she and a couple of other people go to this island where they meet the author and they play games. The winner will receive a copy of his new book. Nobody has seen it before, nobody else has it. But throughout the story, the other thing that you're following is this main character really would like to adopt a child. There's one kid that she's kind of been taking care of, she's been watching over them, but financially she just can't handle it. So emotionally, she and this child are very attached, they take care of each other, they're very much attached in a way that is almost not healthy when you consider how unrealistic it is that they're gonna end up together, because she can't afford her own housing, her own car, really anything. She works as a teaching assistant, so you know how that's gonna go. And the whole time throughout this book, I couldn't tell if you're supposed to be rooting for her or not. Because yes, obviously it would be very nice for her and this kid to get together since they have such a strong emotional connection, but at the same time, she clearly can't afford it. Which is kind of the whole point of this book to begin with, because she's going to this competition so that she can make enough money to have the kid. But at the same time, it's just weird that she's pushing so hard on the fact that she wants this adoption and that they should let it go through because emotionally she wants it and she'll take care of the rest later, when obviously you should be set up to take care of a kid before you take one in. Just on every level, she cannot provide for this child, so I don't know if I'm supposed to be rooting for her and saying that the adoption people are cruel for keeping them apart, or if I'm supposed to be looking at this and saying, hey, these people are completely reasonable and you need to lower your expectations. And the last thing I will say is it was kind of just frustrating to read because it seemed like it was trying very, very hard to be relatable, mentioning how something is a boy color or a girl color or a toy or whatever it is, talking about gender stereotypes and talking about problems in America and just casually making jokes about alcoholism or other things that you shouldn't do. But it threw all of these ideas out in a way that was really casual, and I it felt like it was trying to be relatable to the way that people were talking maybe 5-10 years ago. It felt like how I would talk with my middle school friends. It doesn't feel very relevant to now, which I get. Obviously, books take time, and especially if you're somebody who didn't grow up through that, you might feel like you're being relatable even though the people who lived through it have already grown out of that. I don't know. It wasn't my favorite. If you're ever curious about the specific star ratings that I give any of these books, I always link my Goodreads and Storygraph, but if you've been here, you know I don't like to say it in the videos just in case it's changing, and also just because I don't want to go through the effort of pulling it up on my own. The next book that we have, I'm actually not going to talk about that much just because I did read it for class and tomorrow I have to write a whole discussion about it. I'd rather save my thoughts and energy for that, but I was taking a class on modern family relationships and I was assigned to read My Sister's Keeper. In this book, you're following a family of 5. You got the mother, the father, 2 sisters, and a brother. The dad's a firefighter, the mom's a lawyer, the oldest brother is a little bit of a troublemaker, he's kind of rebellious. The middle sister, this is the important part. The middle sister has cancer. She has leukemia, and from a very, very young age, they knew this, but they weren't really sure how to take care of it because she needed a very specific blood match to be able to go through with any of the procedures that they were going to do because she was super sensitive to really anything. It was just a really sensitive case. And they said, hey, if you wait for a donor, it could take forever, which is the thing that sucks about healthcare in general, just the fact that you have to wait to maybe get a blood match or whatever else it is, somebody who's willing to donate, and until then, you just have to hope for the best. And they said, well, another option is if this daughter has a sibling that has similar DNA, or if she has a sibling that can match up for what we need, then we could use that. And they said, well, we don't have any other kids. And they decided to have a daughter and to use that daughter to medically help the older sister. Through this story, you get everybody's perspectives, but you start off with the youngest daughter, the one who's providing, because originally she was just going to give up her placenta. She wouldn't even know. She was a baby, right? It doesn't matter. But as she's gotten older, as her sister has had more problems, she's had to donate blood, she's had to donate blood. She's had to donate blood, she's had to donate bone marrow, she's had to get these more extensive procedures to now she has to donate a kidney for her sister to potentially survive, and even then they don't know for sure. And you're following her as she tries to start a legal battle with her parents for independence. Basically, she wants to say, hey, you can't just use my body for my sister's benefit. Obviously, it's an incredibly hard thing for a young kid to go through where they have to decide, hey, I deserve bodily autonomy even if it's at the expense of my dying sister. Because at the end of the day, if she denies her sister this procedure, then her sister doesn't have a match. They can't go through with the operation. There are a lot of perspectives in this book. You get not only the youngest daughter, you get the brother, you get both the parents, but you also get a couple people that are dealing with the legal things. So you're hearing everybody's perspectives on this situation and how difficult it is for them all to manage because they're all just trying to do what they think is best, but in a situation like this, there is no best. No matter what you decide, people are going to get hurt. I will say at times that many perspectives did make it a little bit confusing with who I was reading and who they were talking about, who they cared about, but genuinely this was one of the most honest portrayals of a hurting family that I've seen. I think some of the ideas in this are a little bit outdated, but that's to be expected with a book this old. This came out in 2004, so it's 2 decades old. But just some things like one of the characters has a service dog, and I could be wrong, this could just be a personal experience, but I feel like today we're a lot more aware of the function of service dogs, the etiquette that comes with them, and when they're signaling something and when you're supposed to leave them alone. People are kind of more aware, but in this book, they're not aware at all. I'm sure there's still loads of people in this world that have no clue what the etiquette is and when you're allowed to interact with it and when the dog is trying to tell you something or trying to do its job and all that. And genuinely, I don't want to spoil it. I don't want to say anything about the ending, but my jaw physically dropped. I could not close my mouth. I think out of all of the books that I'm going to be talking about, this one had the most shocking ending. I don't even want to think about it. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to say anything else. I'm saving that for my class discussion. The third book that I got to this month was Dark Corners by Meg Golden. This was a book of the month book that I got July, so not that long ago. I'm kind of working backwards with my book of the month boxes. I've been saving them up for so long that now the ones that I got at the start of the year I'm the most attached to, so I'm reading them from now and going back because those are the newest ones, so I don't care as much. Kind of a weird system, but it works for me. In this book, you are following another crime podcast, which I say another because this year I've read more than 3, which I feel like is too many. I don't know why the world is so obsessed with with podcasts right now. It feels like every person in the world is deciding to create a podcast, and it's kind of frustrating to see so much literature that's focused on that because it feels like there's no escape, but also I get that they're trying to be relevant. It's just a little frustrating because, as with any book that's talking about social media, you have to do it a very specific way or else you feel like you're trying too hard. It's hard to write about social media without being somebody who grew up on it, and a lot of these authors are just a little bit too old to really understand what they're writing about. So I was wary going into it. I was just not sure how I would feel about it. We will see this come up in a couple books. But it also doesn't help that the entire premise of this book is focused on social medias and an influencer event. In this book, you're following Rachel Kroll, and she has a podcast talking about true crime, where one time she uncovered something that the police hadn't figured out, and because of that, the person had their sentence reconsidered. She kind of really helped this person who was otherwise being accused of something that they did not do. And because of that, she blew up, and a lot of criminals reached out, said, hey, can you help with my case? Can you maybe try to find something here? That's where she got her fame. But currently, she's being called to Florida because a man named Terrence Bailey is about to get out of prison. A couple years ago, he was accused of potentially murdering some girls, and then just a few days before he gets out, he mentions Rachel's name. People don't know the connection, so they bring her in. And then she sort of self-assigns to the case, like she decides she's going to work independently of the FBI or whatever group is already investigating this case. She decides that she's going to join it, but she's not going to work with them. They say, hey, can you please go home? This man's about to get out of prison and he's going to be a threat and he could potentially come after you and we don't want you here when that happens. And she says, no, I'm curious now. I need to know the answers. Because a very popular influencer who had recently interacted with Terrence went missing. And through the power of influencers, she goes to this event where she gets some insider information that the police otherwise would not have been able to get. It did not feel like there was a lot of communication in this book between all the people that are trying to figure things out. There were a lot of things that could have been solved very easily if they had just talked to each other. Even if you're not on good terms, this is a very serious case, potentially. So it doesn't make sense why they're being so secretive and being kind of petty about it. A lot of things that came up were fairly predictable. I don't think there was anything that I was super shocked at. I knew it was coming from a ways away. You do get multiple point of views for a little bit, but at no point did I feel attached to any of the characters, regardless of who I was reading from. And also the one thing that I cannot get past, the reason that I really didn't enjoy this book at all, is the way that it did cliffhangers. The way that it would end maybe half of the chapters, because throughout this book, the chapter will end with this person reacted in some way. And then at the start of the next chapter, you find out what they were reacting to, why it's so serious, anything like that. And it frustrated me so much because when you're doing a good cliffhanger, you have to reveal something. There has to be some reason why the reader wants to know what's coming up onto the next page, and it has to be more than just a character reaction. It has to be an actual plot point. You can't say, oh, they were walking along the beach and they gasped, and then in the next chapter explain what it was that they came across. You have to mention, maybe name drop somebody, or maybe say they came across a super gory scene or something, and then in the next chapter you elaborate on what it was that they walked in on. But if you don't have any information regarding what's happening, then why do I care to keep going? Just for a quick example, this is page 21, so no spoilers here. They're talking about the influencer girl that went missing. They say Terrence's only visitors were lawyers, that is, until Madison Logan turned up. What did she want from him? I was hoping you would tell me. How would I know? Rachel asked. And this is the final paragraph of that chapter. It says, in answer, Martinez removed another sheet from his folder and held it in midair for Rachel to see. She drew in a sharp breath. Martinez nodded slowly as if to confirm her worst suspicions. Rachel let go of the door handle. She returned to her chair and sat back down. Agent Martinez had her full attention. He has just showed her something that has convinced her to stay in the room and to stay invested in this case, but they fail to mention what it is. All we know is that this character cares about it, but I'm 20 pages in, I don't know anything about this character, why should I care what she's interested in? And then at the start of the next chapter, it goes into, from the CCTV camera, here's what we saw. And it was like that for almost every chapter ending that tried to be suspenseful in that way, where it just held back all of the information, so there was no reason why I cared about moving forward. And what was especially frustrating to me, I'm not going to read it because it is towards the end of the book, but if you have it and you have read it and you want to know what I'm talking about, I think page 289, it does exactly what you're supposed to do. If the entire book had been written like that, it would have been so much more entertaining. Basically, they're trying to track something and they say, hey, we just got this information. What is it? Name drop. The thing here is this person's. End of the chapter. And then new chapter, you elaborate on why this matters. You're invested because you know something and you want to keep reading to find out more about it. And because this book so consistently failed to do that, I just couldn't love it. I just couldn't even really enjoy it. That paired with the idea that it's all based around influencers, and it kind of all plays into the idea that influencers are superficial and that all they care about are these likes and that's the only thing, and the social hierarchy of all of it, and I'm sure that's true for some social spaces, but it fails to mention that some influencers are just decent people. It felt fairly disconnected from everything that it was talking about, and I didn't really enjoy it that much. The next book that we read was actually one that we bought based on the cover alone because I was feeling pretty unmotivated when I was looking at my physical TBR. I asked my partner, hey, can you just go to the bookstore and find a scary book because I want to get into the mood and I'm just feeling a lot of decision fatigue. I really don't want to go try to find a whole new book and then think about all the things that I've seen online. Need a fresh pair of eyes. So they brought back The Family Condition by Cody Lakin. Not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but we did pretty much entirely buy it based on the cover alone, and I was not disappointed by what we found. In this book, you're following a man who meets a lady who was not very willing to talk about her family. It says, when Bennett and Elodie first meet, the connection is immediate and intense. Both of them are trying to escape the shadows of their past, hoping to make sense of their lives in the present. A shadow hangs over Elodie, the disturbing legacy of her lineage and the strange genetic condition that haunts it cannot be ignored for long. You're following them, you see their initial sparks, you see how much they could potentially like each other, they start to open up, but anytime Bennett talks about family and tries to ask, hey, what's your history? What are you running away from? What is so bad about your family that you can't even talk about it? Elodie shuts down. Eventually, he says, hey, we're dating. I want to get to know your family because I like you. So let's just face this and see what it's all about. And when they go to visit the family, Bennett is faced with the harsh reality that Elodie's mother is less than human. She may have a human form, but something is clearly not right about her. She is behind a big glass wall in this house. Not the way that most people live, so he's a little bit confused, as I'm sure many of us would be. I think this book does a pretty good job at reminding you that something worse is coming. That yes, this circumstance is weird, but it's probably gonna get weirder before it gets any better. It throws you immediately into the story and the character interactions without that much build-up, so you just have to get used to it. Which I think in this context works really well because they just meet while they're out and they get thrown into each other's lives, so it makes sense. I don't know how long the story is going to stick with me. Even after reading it, I haven't really thought about it since then. It's not one that I'll forget, but it's not one that I'm organically going to be thinking about. And I think the main reason for that is just the whole thing that it was building up to, it didn't really seem like it even happened. I didn't realize that we were at the climax of the story until it was over, and I realized that that was supposed to be the big dramatic thing, and it didn't make any impact on me whatsoever. And my one main complaint that I have is just I wish we knew more about why this condition was in the family. I guess they vaguely touch on it, and maybe the characters themselves don't even know, but I wish we could get more information about why this is affecting the people, or maybe what happens after, how it will continue to affect people. There wasn't much context for how the story of these four people was gonna affect the world around them, and I wish that was in there. The fifth book that I read is my only Kindle book, and it is Little Ghosts. This book is by Greg Dunnett, and it's kind of a ghost story. In this book, you're following the story of a little girl who was brutally murdered, and in turn she has become a ghost that only her brother can see. He has recently turned 13, which is the age that she was when this all happened to her, and they never got any closure. The family never found out who did it or what really even happened. You're getting multiple perspectives of the mother who's trying to get closure. She doesn't feel satisfied with the way that things went. She wants to find who did it. It's been years since this incident, but she can't move on, which is understandable when there's a crisis this huge. And then you get the perspective of the son who can see the ghost of his sister, and eventually she starts talking to him. This is a new development. This is not something that he was expecting. He was told by his therapist that she's nothing more than a coping mechanism, but she is her own person. She's fully there. I said they're 13. They might have been 10. They're somewhere within that range, but they're still very, very young. I don't know how I feel about this book as a whole, because all of it is based around this plot point in which a 10 or 13-year-old, a preteen, is taken away for multiple days and somebody does some very terrible things to her that the book doesn't even mention. It alludes to certain things happening, but it's too cowardly to ever upfront say what happened or to have this character really go into that experience at all, which I guess makes sense, but at the same time, I feel like if you're gonna go into a topic that's this graphic and this hard to read, then you should at least go all into it. It felt weird that you're gonna include that in the story but be too shy to say it. And along with that, you get the perspective of the ghost, which is just strange to me, to have the point of view of the victim of these really terrible crimes. It suggests that you're able to convey how it would feel, which you just can't. If a 10-year-old is assaulted and murdered, I can guarantee you don't know what they were thinking in their final moments, and it just doesn't feel good to have that character then describe to their brother how it felt to go through those things, it didn't feel good to read. I do think it is possible to have that in literature, but if you're gonna do it, then go the graphic route, go all in, but don't try to make it seem aware, because you're never going to be able to convey that in a way that makes sense. Maybe that's a hot take. I have no clue, but I didn't feel good reading about it. It didn't feel like it was done the right way. But it's your typical ghost story of trying to get closure, trying to find out what happened so this ghost can be at peace. And I kind of think that multiple point of views ruined it. You get the point of the mom, you get the point of the brother, you get the point of view of the sister, and eventually you get the point of view of the person who did it. And I think doing all of that really took away from the suspense, because this is supposed to be a thriller, but kind of the main thing of thrillers is that you don't know what's happening. How can you be thrilled if you're told exactly what's happening from everybody's point of view? And again, the point of view of the victim just felt really insensitive. I think it was a fine book. I read it on a plane just as something to pass the time, and it was okay, but I don't think it's one that I would be recommending. The sixth book, however, is one that I'm very excited about. At the end of June, I picked up The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I had heard a lot of good things about the author, and I'm always kind of cautious about picking up books that I hear a lot about on TikTok. I picked up Addie LaRue. I really loved that book a lot. I felt like it really captured where I was at in life. I could relate a lot to the characters. I had a good time while reading it. So when I went to the bookstore and I saw Gallant, I had to pick it up. In this book, you're following Olivia Pryor, who, for reasons unknown, cannot speak. She lives at a foster home of sorts, and she can see ghouls. She can see the shapes of people around her. They're not fully formed. They're just at the corners of her eyes. She can kind of see them. She kind of knows they're there. She just coexists with them. She doesn't have parents. She doesn't really know what happened to them, but they're not around. That's why she's in the foster home. And all she has to go off of is a journal that her mom left her, and the last page of it says, "You'll be safe as long as you don't go to Gallant." So she's living her life. She's hating most of her time there because the foster home is not kind to her, and then she receives a letter from somebody claiming to be her uncle saying, "Hey, come to Gallant, your family is waiting for you." From there, you're following the mystery surrounding her family. Where did her parents go? Who is this uncle that has never reached out in all of this time? Who are the other family members that live there that she's never heard about? She gets there and she sees a mansion. It's a beautiful house, beautiful garden, more luxury than she has ever experienced. But there's a big wall in the garden. She doesn't know why it's there. It's kind of just a random wall. You could just walk around it, get to the other side. What's its function? Nobody knows. But the family knows, and they just won't tell her. There's something beyond this wall. There's some reason why she can't go to the other side. And the family is keeping some very important information from her, so she decides to figure it out on her own. And if you look at the cover, you might be able to tell what's on the other side of the wall. I read it over the course of 2 days. Genuinely, I didn't want to put it down. I wanted to know what was happening, but my eyes kind of glazed over the ending. I don't know if it's just because I read it so fast that I was just trying to get through it and I didn't really think about what was even happening, or if it's because I didn't care that much, and I wanted to. I really did, because I think I enjoyed it a lot. But the whole time I was reading it, I couldn't stop thinking about A Town Called Panic, which, if you know what that is, then you looked at this, you get it. I don't think this book was bad at all. I think it was very entertaining. I feel like the ending was missing something, but I can't tell what. It just wasn't an entirely satisfying ending. But I will say, overall, it was a pretty solid story. I still had a good time reading it. 2 books left. The first one is The Stranger Upstairs by Lisa Matlin. Again, this is a very recent book of the month. This was from September. Also, I forgot to mention, but shout out to the casual asexual representation in this book. It doesn't really play a part in the story whatsoever, but I thought it was cool that it was mentioned. In The Stranger Upstairs, you're following a woman who decides to move into a house where a couple decades ago somebody was murdered. It's a very unfortunate story, the things that happened in this house, but she decides that she's gonna move there and she's gonna renovate it and then sell it for more than it was ever worth, because it's in a really expensive part of the town, and she's a therapist and a self-help writer. But also she's kind of a famous influencer because she has a top book and she just kind of posts stuff. It mentions from the beginning that she has a lot of secrets, she has a dark past that she doesn't talk about. Same for her husband. They bought this house together, but you very quickly find out that their marriage is just not the greatest. She's renovating this house for blog content, basically. And while she's living there, while she starts these renovations, she feels like the house doesn't want them there. The house doesn't want them to be changing things. From the summary alone, I was a little bit scared to pick this up because it is a very, very new release. And again, I felt like it was trying too hard to be relatable. I felt like it was trying too hard to hit all the boxes of modern technology, which I do think, again, the main reason for that is just because she has a blog and she's a famous person, and a lot of authors have a hard time writing about famous people in a way that's bearable. When I first started off, I very much thought that the writing wasn't my style. It felt very casual, but as you get more into the story, you realize how intentional that is, because the author, not the author, but the narrator narrator, who is sometimes the author because sometimes you get to read her blog posts, but she is not supposed to be likable. You are not supposed to enjoy the main character in this book. She is not a good person. She has secrets and she is deceptive and she will do things to get her way. At first the writing is unbearable, but then you realize it's because the main character thinks and acts that way. It just reflects the way that she's treating the people around her. Throughout this book, her lies are uncovered. You realize that she's just not at all the person that she said she was. And also you learn more about the house's attitude. And then scattered throughout this book, you get some flashes forward from news stories of the house in a couple of months where they say that some bodies were found, suggesting that the murder that originally happened is being repeated, but you don't know who did it, you don't know what happened. And through this, you're following your very unreliable narrator as she deteriorates. She feels like her life is falling apart, her marriage is falling apart, the house is not wanting her to renovate, so she's not going to make any money from it, she's not getting any sponsorships, things are just not going her way. And it's really hard to tell when she is genuinely analyzing a situation and when she's just being super dramatic and upset that things aren't going 100% the way that she wants. There were points where I was sitting alone in my room, completely dark outside, and I genuinely was nauseous with how uncomfortable I was reading this because it was just unsettling. It was scary to think about. And the last thing I wrote in my notes is, I hate to admit it, but I'm invested. I think this is a really fun, spooky read. I had a great time reading it. I didn't want to. I didn't think I was going to, but it pulled me in. And then the last book that I'm going to talk about is one that I actually read today. I started it at 4:30 p.m., took a nap, and then finished it by 9. This book is The Sound of a Wild Snail Eating by Elizabeth Tova Bailey. I bought this for my brother as a Christmas present last year because I saw Allison Pages recommend it. He finished reading it and then gifted it to me and said that he would like me to give it a try. I've been waiting to read it, but currently I'm feeling very overworked and unmotivated, which is just a terrible combination. When you feel like you're doing everything but you don't want to get anything done, it's just so unappealing. Even making this video is not something that I wanted to do, but like I said, we're getting into the fun part of the year, so I'm gonna push myself to do it because I know that I'll enjoy it later. And I thought this book would be a good way to just slow down, just to enjoy the rest of this day, of this month, because ultimately this book just tells you to stop putting so much pressure on yourself. In this book, you're following a woman who falls ill. She is pretty much bedridden. She's not able to do anything for herself. She gets exhausted really easily. And one day, her friend brings her a snail. And through the story, you're following the sick woman and her relationship with the snail. She appreciates the slow living, the slow moving that the snail engages in. And over time, she starts to take care of it more. She grows attached to it. She wants to learn more things about it because it just seems like such an interesting creature. So this book is half snail facts, and it's also half just appreciating the little things in life. Just being able to reflect on all the things that humans are capable of and how little our lives mean. The human timeline is just nothing compared to other creatures. We don't really provide anything. We just come into this earth and we set expectations for ourselves, and then we get stressed that we're not meeting everything, and it just doesn't matter. And this book is just a nice reminder to slow down and enjoy the little things. That's really what it all comes down to. One of the takeaways from this character after this whole experience, after she starts to get better, is that there's lots to do at whatever pace she can get to it at. You get to sort of reflect on your own life and all the responsibilities that you have, and you remember that as long as you're doing stuff, you don't have to be doing it good, you don't have to be doing it fast, but as long as you're getting through another day, then you're succeeding. It's a really light read, it's really fast, it's very cozy. The pages are not very long, they're not intimidating, and if you get lucky, you'll get a snail image at the bottom. And that is my September wrap-up. So overall, I would say it was a very successful reading month, especially considering we went to Georgia for a week in between. I posted a whole vlog about that if you want to see. We went to a music festival. It was a great time. I'm hoping to read lots of books in the next couple of months. I'm hoping to get more seasonal reads because last year I don't think I read any Christmas books. I maybe read 1 or 2. If you have any recommendations for that, please let me know because I really have nothing to go off of right now. My most favorite interaction involving books this month. I was sitting in a Starbucks reading The Stranger Upstairs, and a stranger sat next to me and asked what I was reading. A fairly casual question because sometimes you're just curious. Maybe you want a book recommendation, you see something that somebody's invested in and you want to know. So I told him what the book is. He's an older man and he responds with, "Oh, I never see people reading anymore. Is that for a class?" And I said, "No, I'm enjoying it." And he said, "Is it for a play?" And I said, "No, I'm enjoying it." And he said, "Are you in school?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Is this for a class?" And I said, "No, I'm just enjoying it." He asked what I'm going to school for and then said that I need to take a class in entrepreneurship because AI means that there's no rules, so you have to make your own rules, and he was a business professor. And now I pass that story on to you. I'm gonna end the video here. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. If you like my face and you want to see more of it, you can subscribe to this channel or my main channel, Riverbxnd, where I post music content, or my Instagram, Spotify, Goodreads story graph, which I will always have linked in the description. I think I got everything. I will hopefully see you very soon with another video. Bye!